A young girl went missing from her own bed in 1990, leaving her family in endless torment. But 30 years later, her mother listens to her daughter's old toy recorder, and what she hears makes her blood run cold. The morning light filtered through the curtains of the Parker home on Maple Street as Sarah Parker's alarm clock buzzed at 6:30. She silenced it with a practiced motion, careful not to wake Mark, though he was already stirring beside her. October 19th, 1990, just another Friday in Oak Ridge, Minnesota, where the maple trees outside their window had turned brilliant shades of orange and red. Sarah pulled on her robe and padded down the hallway, coffee mug in hand, mentally reviewing her lesson plan for her third-grade class. She paused outside Emily's door, adorned with colorful stickers and a handmade Emily's Room sign in wobbly kindergarten handwriting. A smile tugged at her lips as she turned the knob, expecting to see her 5-year-old daughter's tousled brown hair peeking out from beneath the pink comforter, surrounded by the soft glow of fluorescent star stickers that dotted the ceiling. The smile froze, then collapsed. The bed was empty. The covers were rumpled and thrown aside. Emily's beloved teddy bear lay on the wooden floor, and, Sarah's heart stopped, the window was cracked open, letting in the crisp autumn air. "Emily?" Sarah called, voice rising as she checked under the bed. "Emily, honey, are you hiding?" The bathroom door stood open, the small space obviously empty. Panic surged through her veins as she ran back into the hallway. "Mark! Mark!" The desperation in her voice sent Mark rushing up the stairs 2 at a time, still clutching the spatula he'd been using to flip pancakes. "What's wrong?" "She's gone," Sarah gasped, pointing to the empty room. "Emily's gone." Mark's face drained of color as he pushed past her, checking the closet, looking under the bed, places Sarah had already searched. "Emily!" His voice cracked with fear. "Emily!" Sarah's hands trembled violently as she dialed 911, barely able to press the buttons. "My daughter," she sobbed into the receiver. "My 5-year-old daughter is missing from her bedroom." Within minutes, the quiet of Maple Street was shattered by the wail of sirens, as Sheriff Thompson's cruiser screeched to a halt in front of the Parker home, followed by 2 more patrol cars. Neighbors emerged from their houses in robes and pajamas, confused and concerned, as uniformed officers spread across the yard and entered the house. "When did you last see her?" Sheriff Thompson asked, his weathered face grave as he took notes in a battered pad. The 52-year-old veteran lawman had known the Parkers for years, had watched Emily grow from an infant to a spirited kindergartner. "Last night," Sarah answered, her voice hollow as she sat at the kitchen table. "I read Goodnight Moon to her at 8, just like always. Mark checked the security system before we went to bed at 10:30. In Emily's room, blue-vested forensic technicians photographed the bed, the window, the floor, every detail of the space. Detective Rodriguez, a newcomer to the Oak Ridge police force, questioned Mark in the hallway. "Any unusual visitors recently? Phone calls? Someone showing interest in your daughter?" Mark shook his head numbly, clutching a small pink recorder in his hand. Emily's prized possession, found fallen near her bed. "Nothing. We're just normal. We're just a normal family." His voice broke on the last word. Outside, Officer Jenkins organized the growing crowd of neighbors into search parties, distributing maps of the area and instructions. "Check garages, sheds, any place a child might hide or be hidden. Report anything suspicious immediately." The Oak Ridge Elementary School was transformed into a command center by mid-morning. Emily's teacher, Mrs. Calloway, sat with red-rimmed eyes as officers interviewed school staff. "She was so happy yesterday," the teacher said softly. "She was telling everyone about a story she recorded for her teddy bears." Mark sat with a security technician, reviewing footage from their home system. His face fell further when the technician pointed out that the external camera had stopped functioning 3 days earlier. "It could be just a coincidence," the technician said, not sounding convinced. "I saw a blue van," Ellen Murdoch, a 67-year-old neighbor, told Detective Rodriguez, "parked across the street yesterday afternoon. I didn't think anything of it at the time." Her voice trailed off, heavy with regret. I don't remember the license plate. As daylight began to fade, Sarah moved through Emily's room for what felt like the 100th time, fingers tracing a crayon drawing Emily had made at school, a family portrait with 3 smiling stick figures standing in front of a house with a red door, just like theirs. "Where are you, baby?" she whispered. FBI agents arrived as darkness fell, Special Agent Wilson taking formal charge of the case. "We're classifying this as a child abduction," he informed the Parkers gravely, setting up a hotline number for tips. "We'll have operators manning the phones 24 hours a day." By 11 that night, most of the investigators had left, promising to return at first light. Mark and Sarah sat on the living room sofa, hands clasped tightly, staring at the silent phone. 16 hours had passed since they'd discovered Emily missing, each minute stretching their nerves thinner. "Try to rest," Agent Wilson had advised before leaving. "We'll call immediately if anything develops." But rest was impossible. The house felt wrong, too quiet, too empty, haunted by the absence of Emily's laughter and the patter of her small feet. Sarah leaned against Mark's shoulder, both of them exhausted beyond tears now, watching the minute hand of the clock tick relentlessly forward. At 2:17 in the morning, the shrill ring of the telephone shattered the silence. Mark and Sarah bolted upright from their uncomfortable vigil on the sofa, lunging for the receiver. Mark grabbed it first, hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "Hello, hello." His voice was raw with hope and terror. For 3 eternal seconds, they heard what sounded unmistakably like a child crying before the line went dead, leaving them clutching each other in the darkened living room, suspended between hope and deeper dread. Was that her? Mark? Was that Emily? Sarah's voice trembled as Mark clutched the phone, still warm in his hand. The child's cry lingered in their ears like a ghost, taunting them with its brevity. "I'm calling Agent Wilson," Mark said, already dialing. Within 30 minutes, the Parker home once again hummed with activity as FBI technicians installed sophisticated tracing equipment on their phone line. "If the caller tries again, we'll be ready," a technician explained, connecting the last wire. "Try to keep them talking as long as possible." Dawn broke with Special Agent Wilson standing in the driveway, cell phone pressed to his ear. "The call came from a payphone at the Sunoco station off Highway 12, he told the Parkers when he returned inside. "Local officers are there now, but the security cameras have been disabled for weeks, according to the manager." Sarah sank into a kitchen chair as her sister Rebecca pressed a cup of tea into her hands. "You need to drink something," Rebecca insisted gently. Through the window, Sarah could see Mark in the backyard, gesturing intensely as he spoke with Sheriff Thompson. The driveway and street had filled with news vans overnight, cameras pointed at every window of the house. A blonde reporter stood on their lawn, microphone in hand. "We're live outside the home of 5-year-old Emily Parker, who vanished from her bedroom sometime Thursday night in what authorities are now treating as a kidnapping." At First Lutheran Church, volunteers gathered in growing numbers. Pastor Miller had opened the church hall as a coordination center, where tables overflowed with photocopied maps and stacks of flyers bearing Emily's school photo, her bright brown eyes and gap-toothed smile, now looking out from every telephone pole and storefront in a 50-mile radius. "We've got teams covering the lake area, the county park, and all the wooded areas," Officer Jenkins announced to the assembled volunteers. "Remember, call in anything suspicious, but don't disturb potential evidence." Detective Rodriguez spent the morning at Midwestern Engineering, where Mark worked as a project manager. He moved methodically through interviews with Mark's colleagues, asking about workplace relationships, potential conflicts, anyone who might have shown unusual interest in his family. "Mark's well liked here," his supervisor explained. 15 years with the company, never had an issue with anyone that I know of." By early afternoon, Sarah and Mark sat rigidly on their living room sofa as cameras recorded their plea to a live television audience. Sarah clutched Emily's teddy bear, her voice breaking. "Please, if you have our daughter, she needs her bear to sleep. She's just a little girl who wants to come home. We won't ask any questions. We just want Emily back safely." Mid-sentence, Sarah's eyes rolled back and she slumped against Mark. Dr. Bennett, who had been standing by, rushed forward to administer a mild sedative, while Mark continued the interview alone, his face ashen. "Emily loves stories," he said, struggling to maintain composure. "She collects those little pink recorders and makes up adventures for her stuffed animals. His voice cracked, "she's the light of our lives." In a conference room at the police station, Agent Wilson and Detective Rodriguez spread out maps marked with red pins, indicating registered sex offenders within a 50-mile radius. "We've got officers conducting interviews with all of them," Rodriguez said. "So far, most have solid alibis for Thursday night." Mrs. Calloway, Emily's kindergarten teacher, dabbed at her eyes with a tissue as Sheriff Thompson interviewed her at the school. "Emily was so excited on Thursday," she recalled. "She kept talking about a story she'd recorded for her teddy bear's tea party, something about a princess adventure." Meanwhile, a police team combed the area around the Sunoco station, meticulously searching ditches and dumpsters. Officer Hansen carefully bagged a small pink hair tie found in the gutter near the payphone. "Could be nothing," he radioed back, "but it's the right color." The investigation took a disturbing turn when Jennifer Watson, mother of Emily's classmate Lily, came forward with troubling information. Lily mentioned a nice man with a blue van who talked to some kids at the playground a few weeks ago, she told Sheriff Thompson, wringing her hands. "He offered to show them puppies. I didn't think much of it at the time. Thought it was just playground talk." As evening approached, Mark sat alone in Emily's room, turning her pink recorder over in his hands, pressing buttons in desperate hope. The battery indicator flashed red, the device nearly dead. Whatever stories Emily had recorded were locked inside, inaccessible until he could find fresh batteries. The second night without Emily descended on the Parker home with leaden weight. As the 48-hour mark approached, the critical window in missing children cases, Sheriff Thompson's phone rang. He stepped away from the Parker home to answer it. "Sheriff Thompson," he said, then listened intently, his expression growing increasingly grave. "Are you certain? Secure the scene. I'm on my way." He found Mark and Sarah in the kitchen, where Sarah was mechanically arranging sandwiches nobody would eat. "We've had a development," Thompson said carefully. "The Henderson County Sheriff's Office found an abandoned blue van in a wooded area near the lake." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Emily? The van is empty," Thompson clarified quickly. "But they found a child's drawing on the back seat. It shows a house with a little girl and the name Emily written at the bottom." Mark gripped the kitchen counter. "Whose van is it?" Sheriff Thompson's eyes narrowed. "It's registered to a Robert Keller. According to the DMV records, he's an employee at Midwestern Engineering. Your company, Mark." But when deputies went to his listed address, the apartment was empty. Keller seems to have disappeared. The abandoned blue van transformed the investigation overnight. Sheriff Thompson and Detective Rodriguez arrived at the wooded area where Henderson County deputies had secured the scene. Forensic technicians in white coveralls worked methodically inside and around the vehicle, dusting for fingerprints and collecting fibers with tweezers and evidence bags. "What do we know about this Keller?" Thompson asked, examining the child's drawing carefully. The crayon illustration showed a simple house with a smiling stick figure labeled Emily in uneven lettering. Detective Rodriguez consulted his notepad. "Robert Keller, 41, works in maintenance at Midwestern Engineering. Been there 8 years, transferred from their Detroit branch. Lives alone, no family in the area that we know of." Sheriff Thompson's weathered face tightened. "Get me his employee photo and background check, and I want officers at his apartment within the hour." By morning, Robert Keller's ID badge photo was being examined in the Oak Ridge Police Station conference room. The image showed a nondescript man with thinning brown hair and unremarkable features, the kind of face that blended into crowds, easily forgotten. "He doesn't look familiar," Mark said, staring at the photo. Dark circles underlined his eyes after another sleepless night. "I mean, I might have seen him around the plant, but I don't remember any specific interactions." FBI agents had already searched Keller's small one-bedroom apartment, Agent Wilson spread photographs across the table, images of a meticulously organized living space, bookshelves lined with technical manuals, and a few paperback thrillers, minimal personal effects. "It's like he was ready to leave," Wilson observed. "Closets half empty, no family photos, nothing that couldn't be abandoned quickly." Detective Rodriguez arrived with a folder from Midwestern Engineering's HR department. Keller requested a transfer to the company's Portland facility on Monday, October 15th, 3 days before Emily disappeared. The transfer was approved and scheduled for next week. The revelation sent a chill through the room. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It had been planned. "Any criminal history?" Thompson asked. "Nothing on record," Wilson replied. "Not even a parking ticket." Forensic results from the van came in piecemeal throughout the day. "We've got multiple fingerprints, mostly Keller's," the technician reported. "Several unidentified prints likely belong to children, based on size. The drawing could have been made by any child. There's nothing definitively linking it to Emily yet." Mark sat with Agent Wilson, struggling to recall any connection to Keller. "He fixed the cooling system in our department once," he said, rubbing his temples. "And I think I saw him at the company picnic last summer, but we didn't speak." Meanwhile, Sarah forced herself to return to Oak Ridge Elementary School to collect some personal items from her classroom. The familiar hallways now felt like a gauntlet as she passed children Emily's age, their innocent chatter a knife to her heart. Her colleague Diane embraced her wordlessly, tears in both their eyes. "We're all praying for Emily," Principal Garner told her, awkwardly patting her shoulder. "The children made cards for her." He gestured to a pile of colorful construction paper on Sarah's desk, covered in wobbly writing and hopeful messages. Sarah nodded, unable to speak as she gathered her things. On her way out, she froze at the sight of a kindergarten class walking in line to the library, several girls with ponytails like Emily's. A sob caught in her throat as she hurried toward the exit. That evening, Agent Wilson sat in the FBI's temporary command center, reviewing the latest findings. Keller was known to organize small parties for employees' children, he told Sheriff Thompson. He kept a few puppies at his home, apparently bred Labradors as a hobby. "That fits with what the Watson girl mentioned," Thompson noted, "the man with the blue van who talked about puppies." Outside the Parker home, the media presence had doubled, but a troubling undercurrent had emerged in the neighborhood. A small group of residents gathered at the corner, their whispered conversations stopping when officers passed by. "It's always the parents, isn't it?" a woman in a red sweater murmured to her companion. "They always look for a stranger when it's right under their noses." Sheriff Thompson addressed these rumors head-on at his evening press conference. "I want to make one thing absolutely clear," he stated firmly, looking directly into the cameras. "Mark and Sarah Parker have been completely eliminated as suspects in this investigation. They have cooperated fully, and our evidence points to an abduction by someone outside the household. I ask the community to avoid harmful speculation and focus on finding Emily." Back at the temporary FBI command post, Mark was reviewing photographs from company events on a laptop. He scrolled through images of the summer picnic, stopping abruptly at one showing Robert Keller in the background. The maintenance worker was standing near a group of children, but his attention was focused entirely on Emily, who was showing something in her hands to another child. There was an intensity in Keller's expression that made Mark's blood run cold. "Agent Wilson," he called, voice tight. "You need to see this." Later that night, Sarah sat alone in the living room, staring at Robert Keller's photo on the local news. The reporter described him as a person of interest in Emily's disappearance. Sarah searched her memory desperately, trying to recall if she'd ever seen this man near her daughter. "The forensic team has found trace evidence of multiple children in the suspect's vehicle," the news anchor reported. Though authorities caution that this may be explained by Keller's involvement in company family events. While the Parkers endured another sleepless night, Mark suddenly bolted upright in bed at 3 a.m, a memory surfacing with terrifying clarity. He grabbed the phone on his nightstand, hands shaking as he dialed Sheriff Thompson's number. "I remembered something about Keller," he said when the sheriff answered. "At the last company picnic, I saw him give Emily a small pink recorder, almost identical to the one she already had. He told her it was for recording special secrets that only the two of them would know." Mark's revelation about the second recorder electrified the investigation. Sheriff Thompson immediately dispatched deputies to search Keller's apartment again, focusing specifically on any recording devices or additional evidence of his interest in Emily. "I can't believe I didn't remember this sooner," Mark said, pacing the kitchen as dawn broke. His unshaven face and rumpled clothes testified to another sleepless night. He seemed so ordinary, just being nice to an employee's kid. But now... Agent Wilson nodded grimly. "Predators often groom children with gifts and special attention. They work to establish trust before making their move." By mid-morning, the FBI had issued a nationwide alert for Robert Keller. His photograph appeared on every news channel, described as the prime suspect in Emily's abduction. Roadblocks were established on major highways leading out of Minnesota, and Border Patrol stations received his information with special alerts for crossings into Canada. Sarah sat at the kitchen table, mechanically sorting through a box of Emily's belongings that Rebecca had brought downstairs. "We need to catalog everything," she explained, her voice distant and clinical. "If there are any other connections to Keller, we might find them here." Her systematic approach worried Mark, who recognized it as her way of maintaining control when everything else was spiraling beyond reach. He watched as she labeled plastic bags containing Emily's hair clips, drawings, and small toys, documenting each item as if preserving evidence. Later that afternoon, Mark attempted to return to work, hoping the familiar routine might provide some respite from the nightmare. His colleagues greeted him awkwardly in the lobby of Midwestern Engineering, their expressions a mixture of pity and discomfort. "We're all pulling for Emily," his supervisor said, awkwardly patting his shoulder. "Take all the time you need." Mark nodded gratefully, but felt increasingly claustrophobic as he walked through the building. In the cafeteria, he stopped abruptly, staring at an empty table in the corner. "Keller used to sit there," he told Detective Rodriguez, who had accompanied him. "Every day, same spot, watching people come and go." The realization that Emily's abductor had likely observed his daily routine for years made Mark physically ill. He rushed to the restroom and vomited, then asked Rodriguez to take him home. He couldn't bear being in the building another minute. Meanwhile, Sarah's methodical cataloging led to a discovery that sent her heart racing. Deep in a box of lesser-used toys, beneath a pile of plastic dinosaurs, she found a second pink recorder, this one decorated with flower stickers instead of stars, exactly as Mark had described. "I found it," she whispered, hands trembling as she held the device. She pressed play, but nothing happened. The battery compartment was empty, the recorder silent and useless without power. Sheriff Thompson arrived minutes after Sarah's call, bringing the device directly to the FBI's mobile forensics lab. "We'll need to process this carefully," the technician explained. "Even if the batteries are dead, there might be recoverable audio stored in the memory." As the first month without Emily dragged on, subtle shifts occurred in the investigation and the community. Television coverage dwindled, relegated to brief updates between newer tragedies. The volunteer center at First Lutheran saw fewer people each day. Even the once constant stream of casseroles and sympathy cards from neighbors had slowed to a trickle. For Sarah and Mark, the silence was deafening. They moved through their home like ghosts, avoiding Emily's room by unspoken agreement. The bright yellow walls and colorful toys remained untouched, like a museum exhibit of happiness suspended in time. One evening, Mark found Sarah removing weathered flyers from a community bulletin board, replacing them with freshly printed ones. "They get ignored after a while," she explained, voice flat. "People stop seeing them." "The sheriff called," Mark said quietly. "They're scaling back the dedicated search teams, not giving up." He added hastily at Sarah's stricken expression, "Just redistributing resources. Thompson promised he's still working the case full-time." The reduced police presence felt like abandonment, though they understood the practical realities. Without new leads, the case was stalling. Keller had vanished as completely as Emily, leaving no digital footprint, no financial transactions, no trace of either of them. On November 18th, 1 month after Emily's disappearance, the Parkers faced an unbearable milestone, Emily's 6th birthday. Sarah spent the morning baking a small pink cake, carefully arranging 6 candles in a perfect circle. Mark watched from the doorway, heart breaking at the sight of her tears dripping into the mixing bowl. That evening, a small gathering assembled in the Parkers' backyard, Sheriff Thompson, Rebecca, and a handful of close friends. They released pink balloons into the twilight sky, each carrying a message to Emily wherever she might be. From nearby houses, neighbors watched through windows, their faces solemn but distant, unsure how to approach a grief so profound. The next morning, as Sarah and Mark sat in the kitchen surrounded by the remnants of a birthday never celebrated, the phone rang. Agent Wilson's tense voice delivered the first promising news in weeks. "We've got a possible sighting," he said without preamble. Security cameras at a convenience store in Spokane, Washington captured a man matching Keller's description purchasing supplies yesterday. He used a credit card under the name Richard Kent, and the footage shows what appears to be a small pink backpack on the rear seat of his car. The possibility of a sighting after a month of nothing sent a surge of adrenaline through Sarah and Mark. Within 2 hours of Agent Wilson's call, they were rushing through Minneapolis Airport, hastily packed overnight bags in hand. Sarah clutched Emily's favorite teddy bear, unwilling to leave it behind in case they truly had found her daughter. "We've booked you on the next direct flight to Spokane," Agent Wilson explained, walking briskly ahead of them toward the security checkpoint. "I'll be on the same flight. Local FBI has already secured the convenience store footage and are canvassing nearby motels." The flight felt interminable, each minute stretching painfully as Sarah stared out the window at clouds that seemed frozen in place. Mark sat beside her, rhythmically clenching and unclenching his fists, a nervous habit she recognized from their early days together. "What if it's really her?" Sarah whispered, voicing the hope she was almost afraid to acknowledge. "What if she's alive and we find her today?" Mark covered her hand with his. "One step at a time," he cautioned, though his eyes betrayed the same desperate hope. In Spokane, they were whisked directly to the FBI field office, where technicians had enhanced the security footage. The grainy images showed a man with Keller's build and posture at the checkout counter, his face partially visible as he glanced toward the door. In the background, through the store window, a sedan was parked with what appeared to be a pink backpack, visible on the rear seat. "Facial recognition gives us an 85% probability match to Keller," the technical analyst explained, pointing to highlighted facial markers on the screen. "Not enough for court, but enough to intensify our search in this area." Sarah leaned forward, straining to see any sign of Emily in the footage. "Can you see if anyone else is in the car? Can you zoom in on the backpack?" The technician shook his head apologetically. "The angle and resolution don't allow us to see inside the vehicle or determine if the backpack was occupied." A command center was quickly established, with maps of eastern Washington displayed on walls and local law enforcement joining the operation. Teams were dispatched to motels, campgrounds, and rental properties within a 50-mile radius of the convenience store. The following morning, Sarah and Mark faced a bank of microphones at a hastily arranged press conference. Local and national media had assembled, the story of Emily's possible sighting reigniting public interest in the case that had begun to fade in Minnesota. "We believe our daughter is alive," Sarah stated, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks, as she held up Emily's latest school photo. "If you've seen this little girl anywhere in the Spokane area, please contact authorities immediately." Mark stood beside her, his arm protectively around her shoulders, but the strain was visible in his tight jaw and shadowed eyes. When a reporter asked how they were holding up, the composure he had maintained cracked suddenly. "Our daughter has been—" His voice broke, and he struggled visibly to continue. Tears streamed down his face as he tried again. "Emily is—" But the words wouldn't come. Sarah pulled him away from the microphones as he began to sob openly, the first public display of the raw grief he had been containing for weeks. Later that afternoon, excitement rippled through the command center. A motel clerk on the outskirts of Spokane had reported a guest matching Keller's description, who had checked out hurriedly that morning, leaving behind some food wrappers and a newspaper. A SWAT team converged on the motel, but found only an empty room with signs of recent occupation. The television was still warm to the touch, food containers in the trash still fresh. They had missed him by perhaps an hour. The investigation received another jolt the following day when authorities located the sedan from the security footage, abandoned in a salvage yard 20 miles outside the city. Forensic teams carefully processed the vehicle, paying special attention to the pink backpack found on the floor of the back seat. Sarah and Mark waited at the FBI field office, hope warring with terror as they anticipated news. When Agent Wilson finally entered the conference room, his expression told them everything before he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. The backpack contained only men's items, clothes, toiletries, maps, no evidence of Emily or any child. Sarah collapsed into a chair, the air leaving her lungs as if she'd been struck. Mark leaned heavily against the wall, his brief surge of hope crumbling into deeper despair. "We believe Keller was traveling alone, possibly headed for the Canadian border," Agent Wilson continued. "We've alerted all crossings with his photo and alias information." The final press conference in Spokane was brief and subdued. Mark, still shaken from his earlier breakdown, read a prepared statement thanking local authorities and asking the public to remain vigilant. Sarah stood beside him, her face a mask of control that threatened to shatter at any moment. Back at their hotel that night, Sarah lay awake at 3:17 in the morning, staring at the ceiling. The clock's red numbers seemed to mock her with their precision, marking another sleepless night in an endless parade of them. Beside her on the nightstand sat a bottle of sleeping pills prescribed by her doctor weeks ago, but she couldn't bring herself to take them. Sleep meant dreams of Emily, dreams that always ended with her daughter vanishing again and Sarah waking in renewed panic. Their return to Minnesota the next day felt like a retreat. As they walked through the Minneapolis terminal, Sarah noticed passengers nudging each other and pointing, recognizing them from the news. Some offered awkward words of support, others averted their eyes, uncomfortable in the presence of such public tragedy. The final blow came when they arrived home. The word "assassins" had been spray-painted in jagged red letters across their front door. Sheriff Thompson was already there, supervising deputies as they documented the vandalism and began cleaning it off. "I'm sorry you had to see this," Thompson said grimly. "We'll find whoever did it." Mark stared at the accusation, too numb to feel proper outrage. Inside, he opened his laptop and discovered a new true crime podcast called Secrets of Oak Ridge that suggested the Parkers might have been involved in Emily's disappearance, citing anonymous sources who claimed their marriage had been troubled and that Emily had a substantial life insurance policy. 3 months after Emily's disappearance, when the investigation officially cooled and the Parkers began to face the possibility they might never discover what happened to their daughter, Detective Rodriguez knocked on their door late one evening, his expression intensely serious. He had discovered that Robert Keller, before working at Midwestern Engineering, had been briefly investigated in another state for suspicious behavior with a child, but the case was mysteriously sealed and the records buried through the influence of someone with connections to the company. Detective Rodriguez spread a manila folder on the Parkers' coffee table, his expression grave in the dim evening light. Keller worked at the Detroit branch of Midwestern Engineering in 1988, he explained, pointing to employment records. A 7-year-old girl reported that he invited her to see puppies in his van, but her parents intervened before anything happened. Sarah clutched the edge of the sofa, her knuckles white. What happened to him? Why wasn't he arrested? That's where things get murky, Rodriguez said, flipping to another document. The investigation was suddenly dropped, records sealed by a Judge William Hargrove. I've been digging into this on my own time, and I found connections between Hargrove and several Midwestern Engineering executives, country club memberships, charity boards, vacation properties in adjacent lots. Mark leaned forward, anger flaring in his eyes. Are you saying the company covered this up? That they knew he was dangerous and just transferred him here? In the sheriff's office the next morning, Thompson paced behind his desk, phone pressed to his ear. I understand protocols, counselor, but we're investigating a child abduction with a prime suspect who has a sealed record of similar behavior. We need those files unsealed immediately. His face reddened as he listened to the response. 48 hours is unacceptable. A child's life could be at stake. 2 days later, Mark sat across from 3 Midwestern engineering executives in the company's glass-walled conference room. The tension was palpable as he slid copies of the Detroit incident report across the polished table. How does someone with this history get transferred to another branch instead of being fired and reported to authorities? Mark demanded, struggling to keep his voice level. The senior VP cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Parker, we understand your distress, but these allegations against Mr. Keller were never proven. The company followed proper protocols based on the information available at the time. 6 months after Emily's disappearance, the Parker home bore the invisible weight of her absence. Sarah stood hesitantly at the door of her new classroom at Oak Ridge High School, watching as teenagers filtered in, their curious glances and whispered comments making her stomach twist. The district had accommodated her request to transfer from elementary education. The daily presence of young children had become an unbearable reminder of Emily. Across town, Mark emptied his desk at Midwestern Engineering, dropping personal items into a cardboard box, while colleagues watched from a distance. His supervisor approached cautiously. You're making a mistake, Mark. Remote consulting won't offer the security or benefits we provide. You're letting conspiracy theories cloud your judgment. Mark's response was cold. My daughter disappeared, and your company protected the man who likely took her. Security is the last thing you've provided my family. That evening, Sarah moved silently through Emily's bedroom, dusting each toy and straightening the already perfect bedspread. The room remained exactly as it had been on the day of the disappearance, a time capsule of childhood frozen in October. Fresh sheets went on weekly, toys were arranged in familiar patterns, Emily's favorite books stacked on the nightstand, preparations for a return that seemed increasingly unlikely. In the kitchen, Mark uncapped a bottle of whiskey and poured a generous measure, his third of the evening. His laptop glowed with open browser tabs, missing persons forums, cold case discussions, stories of families who had searched for decades without answers. The statistical likelihood of finding Emily alive diminished with each passing day, a reality he couldn't voice to Sarah but couldn't escape himself. The following Tuesday, the Parkers sat uncomfortably on opposite ends of a beige sofa in Dr. Levine's office, their first couples therapy session. The therapist observed their body language, Sarah rigid and defensive, Mark slumped and withdrawn. It's normal for couples to process trauma differently, Dr. Levine explained gently. The strain of ambiguous loss, not knowing what happened, can be particularly challenging for relationships. Meanwhile, Detective Rodriguez converted his basement into an investigation hub, pinning photos and documents to a large corkboard. Off-duty and using personal resources, he methodically mapped connections between Judge Hargrove, the Midwestern Engineering Board, and a network of influential figures who could have facilitated the quiet transfer of an employee with troubling allegations. In the Oak Ridge market the following week, Sarah froze in the cereal aisle when she spotted a small girl with braided hair similar to Emily's. Her breathing accelerated, vision tunneling as panic surged through her body. Abandoning her shopping cart, she rushed to the parking lot, gasping for air, as she fumbled with her car keys. Later that night, Mark paused in the doorway of Emily's room, watching Sarah asleep on their daughter's twin bed. Emily's teddy bear clutched against her chest. Conflict etched deep lines in his face, concern for Sarah's increasingly fragile mental state, warring with his own growing acceptance that Emily might never come home. During a video call with Agent Wilson the next day, the Parkers received the news they had dreaded. We continue monitoring all leads, Wilson said, his professional demeanor softening slightly, but I need to be honest. After 6 months, our chances diminish significantly. We're not giving up, but resources are being reallocated to more recent cases. April marked the 6-month anniversary of Emily's disappearance. Sarah spread posters across their dining room table, preparing for a vigil at Oak Ridge Park. She'd printed 50, a stark contrast to the thousands distributed in those first frantic weeks when volunteers had lined up to help. That evening, approximately 50 people gathered in the park, holding candles against the spring twilight. Mark and Sarah stood side by side before the crowd, a visible gap between them both physically and emotionally. Each held their own candle, united only by the framed photograph of Emily on the makeshift altar. Later that night, after returning to their silent house, Mark finally voiced the thought he'd been carrying for weeks. "Sarah," he said quietly in the kitchen darkness, "we need to consider having a funeral for Emily." Sarah recoiled as if he'd slapped her, shock transforming into fury as she screamed, "You're abandoning our daughter. She's still alive somewhere." The word abandonment hung in the air between them, a chasm widening with each passing day. The night of their argument about the funeral marked a turning point, the moment when their divergent ways of coping with Emily's absence became irreconcilable. "How can you give up on her?" Sarah demanded the following morning, her voice hoarse from a night of crying. "What kind of father just decides his daughter is dead, without proof?" Mark stood by the kitchen counter, shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "I'm not giving up, Sarah. I'm trying to find a way for us to survive this. We can't keep living in suspended animation forever." The fundamental divide was unbridgeable. Mark believed they needed to accept Emily's probable death to begin healing, while Sarah interpreted any acknowledgement of that possibility as betrayal. Over the next several weeks, their home became a battleground of silent accusations and tear-filled confrontations. Mark began sleeping on the living room sofa, unable to bear the coldness that radiated from Sarah's side of the bed. Each morning, Sarah would find him there, a blanket twisted around his legs, and walk past without a word, the distance between them growing with each passing day. 3 weeks after their explosive argument, Mark stood in their bedroom, methodically folding clothes into a suitcase, while Sarah watched from the doorway, arms crossed defensively over her chest. "So that's it? You're just leaving?" Tears streamed silently down her face. Mark paused, a sweater half folded in his hands. "I've found an apartment on Elmwood Avenue. I think we both need some space to process this in our own ways." Sarah remained motionless as he carried his bags to the car, the weight of failure crushing her chest. Their marriage, once so solid she'd never questioned its permanence, had become another casualty of that October night. By summer, the divorce papers were filed, citing irreconcilable differences, a sterile phrase that couldn't begin to capture the earthquake that had shattered their lives. In the attorney's office, Mark listened numbly as the lawyer explained the division of assets. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, Judge Brennan will likely be quite understanding about equitable distribution. The house will remain with Mrs. Parker as requested, and the financial arrangements we've discussed seem fair to both parties." That evening, Sarah sat alone in the kitchen of the too-large house, the silence pressing in from all sides as she dialed her sister. "It happened, Rebecca," she whispered. "He really left, like he could just give up on her." Across town, Mark stood in the center of his sparse apartment, a single box of possessions at his feet. The walls were bare except for one framed photograph of Emily on her 5th birthday, frosting smeared across her beaming face. An untouched pizza grew cold on the counter as he stared at the empty space around him, wondering how his life had collapsed so completely. 1 year after Emily's disappearance, Agent Wilson requested a meeting at the FBI field office in Minneapolis. His expression was apologetic but resolute as he faced the Parkers, now seated at opposite ends of the conference table. "After a year without substantial new leads, we're officially reclassifying the case as inactive," he explained, sliding folders across the table to each of them. This doesn't mean we're giving up. Any new information will be pursued, but dedicated resources will be redirected. The following week, Sheriff Thompson's retirement party filled the back room of O'Malley's pub with uniformed officers and town officials. When Sarah arrived, Thompson broke away from a group of well-wishers to clasp her hand firmly. "I promise you, Sarah, I'm not going to stop looking just because I've turned in my badge. Emily's case is coming home with me." By midsummer, Sarah channeled her relentless energy into a new purpose, converting a small commercial space on Main Street into the headquarters of Project Emily, a foundation dedicated to missing children. Volunteers installed computers and phone lines, while Sarah directed the placement of Emily's enlarged photograph on the wall behind the reception desk. Meanwhile, Mark found himself sitting awkwardly in a circle of folding chairs in the basement of Grace Lutheran Church, surrounded by other parents who had lost children to death or disappearance. "The hardest part is not knowing," he admitted when his turn came to speak, "not having a body to bury, a place to visit, living with this perpetual question mark where there should be a period." As autumn approached, Sarah's advocacy work gained regional recognition. The local newspaper ran a feature on Project Emily, with Sarah proudly explaining their mission. "We'll never stop searching. Project Emily has already helped 3 families reunite with their missing children, and we're just getting started." At his new workplace, colleagues gathered around Mark's desk with a small chocolate cake singing "Happy Birthday" with awkward enthusiasm. He forced a smile and blew out the candles, discomfort evident in his rigid posture and quick glances toward the exit. Each night, Sarah stood in the doorway of Emily's room, which remained preserved like a museum exhibit. Toys arranged exactly as they had been, bed made with the same pink comforter, nightlight still glowing softly. "I'm keeping everything ready for when you come home, sweetheart," she whispered to the empty space. October 18th marked the first anniversary of Emily's disappearance. Sarah organized a large vigil through Project Emily, drawing hundreds to Oak Ridge Park. Standing on a small stage, she spoke passionately about hope and perseverance, her voice carrying across the sea of candlelight. "Emily is out there, and we will find her. I will never give up." At the same hour, in a private garden across town, Mark sat with his support group, each person holding a white balloon. As twilight deepened, he released his balloon into the darkening sky, his whispered words carried away on the autumn breeze. "Rest in peace, Princess." The next morning, as Sarah organized materials in her Project Emily office, the mail arrived with an unmarked envelope. Inside, she found a typed note with just 5 words. "Look for Richard Kent. She lives." And a small fluorescent star sticker identical to those that had decorated the ceiling of Emily's bedroom. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the note, the small fluorescent star between her fingers, identical to those that had decorated Emily's ceiling. Her heartbeat quickened, a surge of hope warming her veins for the first time in months. "This isn't from some random crackpot," she told Linda Harris, her assistant at Project Emily, holding out the star sticker with shaking fingers. "This is exactly like the ones from her room." Within an hour, Sarah was seated at former Sheriff Thompson's kitchen table, watching anxiously as he examined the note through a magnifying glass. His beard had grown in gray since retirement, but his eyes remained sharp and methodical as they had been during the initial investigation. "Postmarked Portland, Oregon," Thompson noted, studying the envelope. "No return address, standard printer paper, nothing distinctive about the typing. But this star..." He held it up to the light. "The wear pattern is unique. This definitely could have come from Emily's room." Later that day, Sarah arranged a video call with Agent Wilson, who appeared on screen looking skeptical from the moment she mentioned the letter. "We receive dozens of tips like this every year on high-profile cases," Wilson explained, his voice measured. "Usually they're from attention seekers or people deliberately tormenting the family. Without more substantive evidence, we can't justify allocating resources." Frustrated but undeterred, Sarah drove to Mark's workplace the following afternoon. Sitting in the parking lot, she rehearsed what to say. Realizing this would be their first face-to-face meeting in months, not mediated by lawyers or conducted in the formal setting of FBI offices. When Mark emerged from the building, he froze momentarily upon seeing her, then approached slowly, wariness evident in his posture. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important," Sarah said, handing him the note and the star sticker. Mark examined the star, immediately pulling out his phone to compare it with a photograph of Emily's room he still kept. His initial skepticism visibly wavered as he studied the distinctive pattern of wear on one point of the star. "The degradation marks are identical," he said quietly. "This came from her ceiling." 3 days later, Sarah, Mark, and Thompson boarded separate flights to Portland, converging at the airport with the awkward formality of distant acquaintances forced to collaborate. Thompson had arranged a meeting with the local police department, where Detective Michelle Chang greeted them in a small conference room. "I checked the records as you requested," Chang explained, spreading files across the table. "A Richard Kent appears in our system in January 1991, approximately 3 months after Emily's disappearance. He obtained a driver's license, social security card, and established residency in North Portland." That evening, Sarah and Mark sat uncomfortably at a corner table in their hotel restaurant, the weight of their shared history and subsequent estrangement creating a palpable tension between them. Years of separation and hurt made even simple conversation feel like navigating a minefield. "We need to be realistic about what we might find," Mark cautioned, his voice low. "Even if Kent is Keller, we don't know if—" "Don't," Sarah interrupted sharply. "Don't say it." The following morning, Thompson visited the Department of Records, examining Kent's original identity application documents. "The birth certificate used belongs to a child who died in 1953, he reported back to the group. "Classic identity theft technique. Someone who knows what they're doing." While Thompson pursued paper trails, Sarah found herself standing across the street from Cedar Heights Elementary, where records indicated Kent had worked as a maintenance technician for several years. She watched children streaming into the playground, her eyes automatically scanning for a familiar face among them, though logic told her Emily, now 16, would be much too old for elementary school. Across town, Mark interviewed a retired school secretary who remembered Kent from his time at Cedar Heights. He was quiet, efficient, she recalled, fidgeting with her glasses. Good with repairs, but something about him always made me uncomfortable, especially the way he watched certain girls, the quiet ones, usually with brown hair. By evening, Thompson and Detective Chang had uncovered personnel files showing Kent's abrupt departure from the school. Transferred to Nevada due to incompatibility with school culture, Chang read aloud. That's typically code for something more serious that the school wanted to handle quietly. Back in her hotel room that night, Sarah created an impromptu investigation board on the wall, pinning up maps, photos, and timeline notes connected by red yarn, a physical manifestation of the connections forming in her mind. Mark, stopping by to share some documents, paused in the doorway, watching her work with the same intensity she'd shown during those first desperate weeks after Emily vanished. "She's exactly like she was that first year," he murmured to Thompson in the hallway. "What if this is just another dead end? I don't know if she can survive another disappointment." After a week of investigation, the group gathered in Sarah's hotel room, spreading a map of the United States across the desk. Detective Chang traced a path with her finger across several states. Based on tax records, Kent worked briefly in Reno, then Carson City, but the trail goes cold in 1996. He simply disappears from the system again, which suggests another identity change. As their Portland investigation seemed to be stalling without concrete results, Thompson's phone rang. The former sheriff stepped into the hallway to answer, returning minutes later with renewed energy in his movements. "That was Rodriguez," he announced. "He's been quietly digging into those sealed Midwestern engineering files. Keller wasn't just maintenance staff. He had access to a security camera system throughout the plant, including recordings of the parking lot where Mark parked every day. He could have been studying the Parkers' routine for months before the abduction." Rodriguez's revelation about Keller's access to security footage cast the abduction in a disturbing new light. The group huddled around the hotel room table, examining the documents Rodriguez had sent. Screenshots showing Keller repeatedly monitoring the employee parking lot from his security station. "This wasn't opportunistic," Thompson said, his weathered face grim. "This was calculated. He studied your routines, your schedules, probably for months." Sarah paced the room, her energy renewed by this concrete connection. "He watched us. He planned it all." She pointed to a document showing Keller's security clearance. "Look, he had access to every camera in the building. He could track Mark's movements, know exactly when he left work each day." Detective Chang spread additional files across the table. Rodriguez found something else: records indicating Keller regularly accessed security footage archives, particularly external cameras that would show your arrival and departure patterns. 10 years after Emily's disappearance, the impromptu investigative team began assembling a comprehensive timeline of Keller's movements. Mark created a spreadsheet tracking the suspect's employment history, revealing a disturbing pattern: maintenance positions at schools or facilities with access to children, tenure of 2 to 3 years at each location, followed by abrupt relocations coinciding with emerging suspicions about his behavior. "He's methodical," Mark observed, scrolling through the data. "He establishes himself in a position of trust, flies under the radar until questions start, then disappears before formal investigations begin." Later that evening, Sarah updated her wall map, connecting Portland to Reno to Boise with red yarn, muttering as she worked. "You leave traces, no matter how careful you are." The next morning, Thompson organized a video conference with Rodriguez, Agent Wilson, and Detective Chang. Wilson, initially skeptical, now leaned closer to his camera. "I see the pattern," he admitted reluctantly, "but we're talking about decade-old trails and circumstantial connections. The Bureau needs something more substantive to justify reopening this as an active case." Mark spent hours at his laptop that night, fingers flying across the keyboard as he searched for similar cases. "Look at this," he said, turning the screen toward the others. 3 separate incidents in different states where school maintenance workers were investigated for suspicious behavior with female students, but transferred before formal investigations could begin. The following day, Sarah visited the regional FBI office in Portland, her frustration evident as she faced a bureaucratic wall. 10 years, and you still don't see enough to issue a national alert?" she demanded. "How many children need to be at risk?" Recognizing the limitations of official channels, Mark arranged a meeting with Jack Morales, a former FBI agent now working as a private investigator. At a quiet cafe away from the hotel, Mark explained their situation. "I need someone who isn't limited by bureaucracy and can follow this trail wherever it leads," he said, sliding a check across the table that represented most of his savings. Meanwhile, Thompson called in favors from old colleagues across the country. "Dave, I know I'm asking for a huge favor," he said during one such call, "but I need access to that unofficial database you veterans maintain. It's about the Parker case." By the end of the week, the hotel room had transformed into an operations center, with walls covered in photographs, documents, and maps. Computers processed public records data, while the team worked in focused silence, following the ghost of Robert Keller through his various identities. On the 6th day, Detective Chang burst into the room with a folder. "I found something. A maintenance worker at an elementary school in Boise from 1997 to 1999, dismissed after parent complaints, matches the physical description and behavioral pattern." Morales obtained a blurry security photo from the Boise school showing a man from behind. He pointed to the figure's distinctive posture. "We can use software to compare this with earlier images of Kent and Keller. The way someone walks is like a fingerprint, almost impossible to disguise completely." Sarah and Mark worked side by side at separate computers, reviewing employment records across the western states. A moment of synchronicity occurred when they both looked up simultaneously, having found similar patterns in different locations. The next afternoon, Morales presented a digital map with red dots indicating confirmed locations. Based on all the data we've collected, these are the verified places where our suspect worked over the past 15 years, always near schools or institutions with children. Thompson, methodically organizing a timeline on a whiteboard, stepped back to examine the pattern. If he maintains his 3-year pattern per location and left Boise in 1999, we can project his subsequent movements. Late that night, as the team gathered around the table with cold coffee and takeout containers scattered between documents, Morales received a call that changed his expression instantly. "I have a contact at the Washington State Department of Education who just found something," he said, lowering his phone. A Richard Kent was hired as a janitor at an elementary school in Port Angeles in 2005, and he's still there. The revelation electrified the room. After 15 years of searching, they finally had a current location. As the team prepared for the 3-hour drive to Port Angeles the following morning, Morales made a devastating discovery while examining school records obtained through his contacts. Among the staff photos, the man identified as janitor Richard Kent was unmistakably an older version of Robert Keller. Even more disturbing, in the background of a spring festival photograph, partially visible, was a teenage girl of approximately 20 years, with hauntingly familiar brown eyes, wearing a volunteer assistant badge with the name Emma Kent. The photograph of Emma Kent silenced the room. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached out to touch the blurry image of the teenage girl with familiar brown eyes. For several seconds, no one spoke, the implications too overwhelming to immediately process. "It could be her," Sarah whispered finally, her voice breaking. "Mark, look at her eyes. They're Emily's eyes." Mark studied the photo, his expression a complex mixture of hope and terror. "We need to be absolutely certain before we do anything. If this is Emily..." The discovery catalyzed immediate action. Agent Wilson, now fully convinced by the mounting evidence, arranged a conference call with the FBI field office in Seattle. By morning, a coordinated operation was taking shape, with surveillance teams dispatched to Port Angeles to monitor both the elementary school where Kent worked and the modest suburban home where he reportedly lived with his daughter. "This needs to be handled with extreme caution," Wilson warned during the planning session. "If Kent is indeed Keller and he suspects we're onto him, there's no telling how he might react." The psychological impact of potentially finding Emily after 20 years weighed heavily on Sarah and Mark. As they waited in a hotel near Port Angeles, instructed to maintain distance from the operation, Sarah obsessively reorganized Emily's childhood photographs, while Mark sat silently by the window, watching rain streak down the glass. "What if she doesn't remember us?" Sarah asked suddenly. "She was only 5 when he took her." Mark had no answer. The question had haunted him since seeing the festival photograph. Would their daughter, if it truly was Emily, recognize them at all? Or would she see them as threatening strangers, upending her life? 3 days into the surveillance operation, FBI agents confirmed that Emma Kent was indeed 20 years old and worked as a volunteer assistant at the same elementary school, where Kent was employed as a janitor. Video footage showed a young woman moving confidently through the school hallways, interacting warmly with children, completely unaware that her entire life might be built on a monstrous lie. On the 4th day, agents obtained a discarded coffee cup Emma had used in the school cafeteria. The DNA results arrived 18 hours later, a match to the Parker family samples preserved in the FBI database for 2 decades. The scientific confirmation left no room for doubt. Emma Kent was Emily Parker. Agent Wilson met with Sarah and Mark in their hotel room, his typically stoic demeanor softened by the significance of the moment. "We've confirmed through DNA analysis that Emma Kent is your daughter," he said simply. "We're moving forward with the arrest tomorrow." The operation unfolded with precision the following afternoon. As Richard Kent left the school building, heading toward the faculty parking lot, plainclothes agents intercepted him far from Emma's view. Agent Wilson personally read him his rights, as he was quietly handcuffed and placed in an unmarked vehicle. Simultaneously, two female agents and Dr. Patricia Reeves, a forensic psychologist specializing in long-term abduction cases, approached Emma in the school library, where she was helping students with an art project. Their carefully rehearsed introduction was deliberately vague. They needed to speak with her about an important matter regarding her identity. Emma's initial confusion turned to defensive anger as she was escorted to a conference room at the local police station. "There must be some mistake," she insisted, her voice rising. "My father would never do anything wrong. He's raised me since my mother died when I was a baby." In a waiting room down the hall, Sarah and Mark sat with their hands tightly clasped, the first genuine gesture of unity between them in years. Neither spoke, both too overwhelmed by the knowledge that their daughter was just meters away, separated by walls and 20 years of manufactured memories. Dr. Reeves spent 2 hours with Emma, gently presenting evidence of her true identity: birth records, photographs of her childhood home, newspaper clippings about her abduction. Emma's reactions cycled through denial, anger, and stunned silence as her reality crumbled around her. "This can't be true," she repeated, shaking her head as she pushed away the documents. "My father would never do this. He loves me." When the moment finally came for Sarah and Mark to enter the room, the air seemed to vibrate with tension. Emma physically recoiled at the sight of them, pressing back in her chair as if to escape. Her eyes, so familiar yet set in the face of a young woman they'd never known, were wide with shock and fear. "Emily," Sarah whispered, stopping several feet away, understanding instinctively that any attempt to embrace her would be too much. "My name is Emma," she responded automatically, her voice barely audible. "I don't know you. I don't know any of this." In another part of the building, Richard Kent finally confessed after hours of interrogation. In a flat, emotionless tone, he described developing an obsession with Emily after seeing her at company events. He detailed how he had planned the abduction for months, studying the Parkers' routines through security footage, waiting for the perfect opportunity. He explained how Emily had awakened during the abduction, how he had convinced her they were going to see puppies, and how, over time, he had systematically erased her memories of her real parents, replacing them with stories of a mother who had died giving birth and a father who had dedicated his life to raising her alone. 6 months after the discovery of Emily, the Parker family faced the complex process of reconnection and healing. Emily, still struggling to integrate her true identity with the life she had known for 20 years, agreed to attend weekly family therapy sessions with Sarah and Mark, who now lived in separate homes in Port Angeles, to be near her. As she watched her biological parents sharing a moment of silent understanding during a particularly difficult session, Emily finally picked up the old pink recorder Sarah had brought, pressed the play button, and heard for the first time the voice of her forgotten childhood telling stories about teddy bears and princesses, an echo from the past that finally began building a bridge to her future.